If we want to go to heaven, we need a total transformation. We need it as individuals, and we need it as a church. And the time has come to speak about these things, because we are told that the straight testimony will cause the shaking. We will have to have a total transformation. In this series, which is called Total Transformation, we will be talking about the church. We'll be talking about the remnant church, and the idea is not to run down the remnant church, but to uplift it and to show it in its prophetic context. That doesn't mean that we do not call sin by its right name. And if we look at the prophetic context and the typological context of the church, then we will see such beautiful parallels between ancient Israel and modern Israel. And some of the parallels are not so beautiful, so those also will have to be brought to the fore. But one thing that God has always willed for His church is unity of action and cooperation between its members. And so in this introductory lecture, I want to draw lessons from the book of nature to see if we can find any aspects on the character of God which He might want to embody in His spiritual body, the church. So I've titled this lecture, Codependence, the Unselfish Planet. Of course, if we look at the planet today, it doesn't look as though it is an unselfish planet. But if we put on the glasses, which will make us look at the pinks and ignore the thorns, which are a consequence of sin, we can see aspects of God's working in nature, which we will be able to transcribe to His people. Our lead text to the series Total Transformation comes from Romans chapter 12, verse 2. And we will be seeing this text many times in the series. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. In other words, for discernment we need a renewing of the mind. And the renewing of the mind will bring about a transformation in action and in character. And it is a transformed character that God requires from His church, both individually and corporatively. Job chapter 12 verse 7 tells us, "But ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee. And the fowls of the air, and they shall tell thee. Or speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee. And the fishes of the sea shall declare unto thee." So obviously God is saying, if you want to understand something about the character of God, and therefore the character which should be reflected in His church, go and look at the lesson book of nature. Go and study nature. Go and look at its interactions and see what God is all about. Look at the beasts, look at the birds, look at the earth, look at the fish, look at the sea. We want growth in grace. Tell your children about the miracle working power of God as they study the great lesson book of nature. God will impress their minds. The farmer plows his land and sows his seed, but he cannot make the seed grow. He must depend on God to do that which no human power can do. The Lord puts His vital power in the seed, causing it to spring forth into life under His care. The germ of life breaks through the hard crust, encasing it, and springs up to bear fruit. First appears the blade, then the ear, then the full corn in the ear. That is the progression of Christian growth as well. You cannot expect a new Christian to be a full-blown plant with all the necessary fruits. It starts with the blade, then with the ear, and then with the full corn in the ear. As the children are told of the work that God does for the seed, they learn the secret of growth in grace. We have to rise above our surroundings. The world is not perfect, but within this imperfection, God is calling out a perfection. In America, we have the freshwater lilies. These beautiful lilies come up pure and spotless and perfect without a single mar. They come up through a mass of debris. I said to my son, I want you to make an effort to get me the stem of that lily as near the root as possible. I want you to understand something about it. He drew up a handful of lilies and I looked at them. They were all full of open channels and the stems were gathering the properties from the pure sands beneath. And these were being developed into the pure and spotless lily. It refused all the debris. It refused every unsightly thing, but there it was, developed in its purity. And this is how God wants us to grow. This is not a perfect world, it's a sin-ravaged world. But He wants us to take that which is good and pure and holy and to grow up into the full stature of men and women in God. So God created this earth for man, and man was the crowning creation of this mini cosmos of the universe. Here we were. God created this world perfect, without the mar of sin, and here He put man. Man was created to refute the claims of the enemies of God, and this creation is not arbitrary. We're not some afterthought. This is a very special creation, this planet. In Psalms 8 we read, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is Thy name in all the earth. Who has set Thy glory above the heavens, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings has Thou ordained strength, referring to us, because of Thine enemies, that Thou mightst still the enemy and the avenger. So man, the creation of man, is not an afterthought, but a solution to a problem. When I consider the heavens, the work of Thy fingers, the moon and the stars which Thou hast ordained, what is man that Thou art mindful of him? And the Son of Man that Thou visiteth him? You know, we tend to think that man is an insignificant little worm somewhere on an insignificant planet. What is man that You are mindful of him? But we could read this differently. We could read, what is man that You, the God of heaven, are so mindful of him? And let's see whether that could be the right context, for it says, for Thou hast made him a little lower than the angels. And the word there, Elohim, can be translated God. In the old Protestant Bible, the Geneva Bible actually had it that way. Thou hast made him a little lower than God, and crowned him with glory and worship. Well, you don't crown a worm with glory and worship, so this must be something special. Of course, it's also messianic, but it also refers to this creation. And then thou madest him to have dominion over the works of thy hands, and hast put all things under his feet. So this creation had to have dominion, a mini cosmos and mini heaven, as it were, where God ruled. Here it was created. All sheep, oxen, beasts, fowls, fish, everything that passes through the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. So this little word there, Elohim, means angels, but it also means God. Fascinating. Now in Hebrews we find a similar text, and there it is, angels. But notice what the text really says. Thou madest him a little lower than the angels. Thou crownest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet. For in that he put all in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him, a reference to Christ, but also to the creation of man. But now we see not yet all things put under him, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he by the grace of God should taste death for every man. And the Greek there, tisbrakos, actually means made him for a little while lower than the angels. So man has the potential to grow, not to supersede the angels, to be greater than angels, but to have an understanding of the mindset of God, in the sense that they had to control a mini cosmos like God controls the universe, and in that sense understand the mindset of God when it comes to rules, regulations in terms of governing his universe. As we have to set boundaries and rules for our children in order to avoid chaos, so God does the same. So this little word tis there and brakos means for a little while, for a space of time. Now when we prepare a baby's room, as it is to be born, as we prepare for the baby, so God meticulously prepared the environment that would nurture and sustain us. He didn't just put us here and say, there, evolve. Every aspect, every detail was considered, and all are vital for harmonious, codependent coexistence. Total harmony. If there is total harmony in heaven, then God created it here as well. Each link in the chain of creation is vital to life on the planet and needs to be nurtured meticulously in order to preserve the planet. And man was then placed as the overseer of this microcosmos, and it was in his power to sustain it or destroy it. Fascinating story. We read in Genesis 1:28, and God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And I've always said, to none of the angels did God give dominion. To none of the angels did God say, be fruitful and multiply. To none of the angels did he say, subdue. So here is a cause for considerable jealousy on the part of Satan and his hosts. When God created this world, on day one he created the light. Day two, the firmament, and he separated the firmament above from the firmament below. And day three, He created the earth with the plants on it. So He created the physical spaces, and then in day 4 and 5 and 6, He filled these physical places. He put the sun and the moon and the stars in their order. He put the marine and the flying creatures into the firmament above and the firmament below, the waters above and the waters below. And then He put the animals and man onto the earth with all the plants which were there for food. And then there was this special 7th day where we came face to face with God to worship and serve the God who nurtures and sustains us. So here was a week of creating the spaces, filling the spaces, and then incorporating God into the fullness of this creation. Every single day being special. And when God created Eden, it must have been amazing. Eden must have been stunning. The diversity of animal and plant life reflected in the paleontology testified to a biome so rich that we cannot even imagine it today. We have a fraction of the animals that existed in the past. So this planet must have been teeming with life. And ever since Eden, there has been a decline and a deterioration. At the flood, there came a mega divide with a continuous deterioration up until now. So when we look at our sin-marred planet today, we have to put on special glasses to filter out the consequence of sin and see the divine plan still present to this day to those who want to look for it. The Bible says that this world was destroyed by a flood. And if we go into the paleontological and the geological record, we find a layer which is called the chalk layer, the Cretaceous. And since this is a universal layer, it testifies to the fact that the whole world was covered with water at the same time. Because this sediment of marine organisms, such as these shells and microscopic calcium carbonate shells of even single-celled animals, testify that everything was covered by water at the same time. This makes evolution impossible because you cannot interfere with a universal coverage of water destroying life that would also interfere with the continuity of the evolutionary process. So a universal flood destroys the concept of evolution. And yet we have this universal chalk layer. We find it everywhere. Here are some of the great coal deposits we find in the world. This one is a particularly large open mine of brown coal in this geological period, and there's the white chalk layer. And when you look at it, you find the shells and the remains of marine organisms. This world has been destroyed. And what we see today is but a tiny reflection of its greatness. One point that I want to bring forth is the fact that the world must have been very different to what it is today. And I find the fish very interesting when it comes to talking about past events. Here we have a little diagram of fish anatomy, and we can see there the liver and the stomach and the intestine and heart and swim bladder and kidneys and gonads and urethra and the gonadal tubes. and the bladder and the gills and all of these little structures incorporated here. And inside this kidney over there, there's a secret which tells us that the Bible just might be right after all. Fascinating. Today we have the largest portion of the planet covered with oceans, with salt water, with an osmotic concentration of about 1,000 milliosmolar. And the question is, the fish and all these organisms that swim in there, are they adapted to a new world post-flood, or is there a story which tells us that things might have been different in the past? Within the kidney of these fish, as in any mammal, we have a structure called the glomerulus. Now that is an organ of ultrafiltration. And what happens is the blood is pumped into this wider vessel over here, and then it breaks up into this capillary corpuscle over here, and the blood going out has a narrower blood vessel. So the obvious result from this is, as the blood is being pumped in and then forced into tinier channels and eventually out of a smaller channel than it came in, is that the pressure in there is increased, and then you have what we call ultrafiltration. Fluid is forced out of the blood vessel and ends up over here, and then is taken away by this tube. Now this is an interesting structure, because this structure is designed to take the fluids out of the body, and the kidney has thousands upon thousands of these operating at the same time. And then in the tubes, the fluid is modified, the salts and the good components are reabsorbed, and the rest, the water and the toxic substances removed from the body, are then excreted via the kidney. Now, the kidneys operate because this structure ultrafiltrates. But there are also parts of this tube that can actually secrete or excrete noxious compounds directly into the tube. Now, in the fish, in seawater, this structure creates a problem to the marine fish. The reason being that the fish has a concentration, salt concentration, which is less than that of seawater. In other words, it's only about 1/3 of the concentration of seawater. And so water is constantly being removed from the fish through the gills by osmosis and through the surface, and the fish really has a problem of dehydration. And this structure would cause the loss of even more water. And so the fish solves this problem by making this organ non-functional. We call this process functional aglomerular function. So it cuts out this organ, and it does that by constricting that blood vessel that this structure doesn't work. In some cases, this structure is greatly reduced, tiny, and in 1 or 2 fish, it is no longer there. But those are very specialized fish. Most fish have this structure. Now, why would a marine fish, if it evolved in seawater, have a structure like this in its kidney that is a problem for it? Because it's designed to get rid of water. Of course, when this fish now swims into fresh water, the story is reversed. Now the concentration, the salt concentration of the fish is higher than that of the water, and water will move into the fish by osmosis, and then it needs this structure or else the fish would explode. So the only solution to the problem as to why all the marine fish have this structure is that at some stage they must have lived in fresh water. And so I'm wondering, is it possible that the pre-flood world was totally different when this ocean that we have today didn't exist because those great salt fountains from the deep that created the salt and the massive erosion of land caused the salt concentration of the sea? Is it possible that the world was totally different? Everything was great freshwater lakes, and the Bible talks about these issues. The Bible says the climate was different. There was no rain. The Bible says that the plants were watered from underneath, and then there was a dew in the morning. It describes a different planet, a different environment. It's fascinating to me that in the farming world, to spray water onto the plants is really quite a hazardous process because it encourages fungal growth. So today we try to do low-level irrigation where these things do not happen. I believe God has left pointers like this structure to tell us that His word is true and that things were very different in the past. Our planet today bears but a few reminders of what it must have been like. Nevertheless, if we study the book of nature, we can discern the handiwork of God. Here are some of the wild flowers in the little Karoo in South Africa. And there's another flower. Oh no, that's my wife. And you can look at the flowers, or you could look at the arid background, and you can see the thorns and the thistles, or you could see the reminders that God has left to tell us what His planet and His plan for us really is about. This lesson book called Nature, to me, is fascinating. As I look at the animals on this planet, and I see them browsing, and I see this arid area and some of the not so arid areas, it makes me think, and what kind of lessons has God put into the animal world for us to study? When we look at the African plains and we look at the elephants and the buffalo and the springbok and all the Great Plains animals, and we see the interaction between nature and the environment and the animal, we find that there are cooperations between organisms. How did God create it that every single animal has its own little environment, which science would call a niche, and would claim that there was a battle for survival to fill the various niches. But what if this came about by creation? To create harmony and to disperse the animals over the various plants that God had created. If we look at the Great Plains animals and we see how they move through an area, and you have here buffalo, and you have zebras, and you have different kinds of animals moving across the grasslands, then it's fascinating to note that every single one of them occupies a different level. The one group moves through, and with their tongue wrap their tongue around the grasses and break off pieces and consume them. And then the grass is shorter. The next wave comes along and consumes the rest of that plant. And the zebra, for example, is able to clutch the very bottom and rip it out, shake it loose, and get its sustenance more from the roots. So there's an ecological distribution. There is no competition. in terms of the grasslands, because each one of these creatures takes a different path. There's something for everyone, and their tooth structure and their behavioral structure is adapted to this kind of life. This planet must have been filled with animals such as we cannot imagine. And there are a few places in the world where God has just left a little touch of what it must have been like. So let's go to the Great Plains of Africa and see some of the birds and some of the herds that we see today. And these are a mini reflection of what it must have been like in the past. These are springbok in South Africa. Now, as a zoologist, I have a great interest in animals, and I love animals, and we've always studied animals. I've done a lot of research, been involved in projects on springbok. I've been involved in the Namib Desert Ecology projects, and have seen probably more than many others have seen of wildlife and animal life. And as I travel through Africa and I see these things, when you see a herd of these today, they're small herds. They're small. Here a group, there a group. We're not seeing the large herds that we saw just now, but even those herds that we saw just now on the Serengeti plains dwarf compared to what these herds were like just 300 years ago. Reports are that if people moved into an area and a herd of these springbok came by, the herd was as large as the eye could see, and the migration to come past any fixed point, a house or a place where people lived, it would take 3 to 4 days, even a week, for the herd to pass by. And today we have little clusters like this, and we think, oh, how sweet and how nice. This planet must have been teeming with life as we cannot imagine it. And every single one of these creatures occupied his specific little parameter without interfering with anyone else on the planet. And science has told us many things as to how this has been arranged in the environment. And here we have a fascinating example. This is the eland. This is the largest antelope in the world. And we can see him browsing. Now, when this creature browses in a tree, or browses a tree, eats the leaves in a tree, a fascinating process takes place. As the leaves are broken, as he breaks the leaves with his teeth and plucks at them and eats them, so the leaves produce a pheromone. And this pheromone wafts into the area of the tree and the surrounding trees, and immediately the plants start producing tannins. And they pump them into the leaves. And then the leaves become astringent, and the eland stops browsing. And then he will move, or the entire herd will move along about 50 to 100 meters, and will start browsing again, because the pheromone has not yet affected those trees. Now, science will tell us this is co-evolution. But how did it evolve? How did this co-evolution evolve? How did the plant protect itself from the overgrazing? And how did the eland adapt to the various issues? Isn't there a better explanation? Couldn't this be creation? Didn't God design it so that the plants should not be overgrazed and overutilized? Fascinating that the young leaves have higher concentrations of these compounds, so that the eland would be constrained to avoid these young leaves and eat larger of the older leaves. And so the plant is protected so that it can continue to grow. And to avoid overgrazing, as soon as the grazing takes place for a considerable time, the tannins are too high, he moves on and the plant can recover. So this is how God spread the animals over the plant kingdom, because plants were created as a source of food. And this should be sustainable. We use this word a lot today. These particular flowers were our own. They grew in our garden. This is an orchid. And we can see some of the meticulous care that God put into the detail. There's no evolutionary advantage at all in being beautiful. None. There's no advantage at all. Because if evolution is correct, then all that we need is reproduction. And you don't have to be beautiful to reproduce. You can be ugly to reproduce. You don't have to have a sweet smell. You can smell like, well, whatever. You can attract flies. And it will do the same thing. You don't have to be symmetrical, as we see here. So this beauty tells us that there is a designer, a master designer. How did we evolve to perceive this color? Not all animals can see color. You have to have the rods and the cones and the eyes. And then that is only converted to an electrical impulse. It's no good developing the rods and the cones over times, over millions of years. Within the brain, you must then develop the capacity to discern the electrical impulses and interpret them as color and picture. The combination of that is more complex than any one of these cameras standing here today. And yet no one in his right mind would say that any one of these cameras developed by chance through evolutionary processes. So it's not only the object that is beautiful, but the structures and the intricacies of the organs, to discern them and see them in the first place, tell us of the meticulous care of a master designer. Well, in 1962, a book appeared on the market which changed the face of thinking in terms of the environment of the entire planet. The book was entitled Silent Spring, and the author was Rachel Carson. Published in 1962, the book is widely credited with helping launch the environmental movement. The book documented detrimental effects of pesticides on the environment, particularly on birds. Carson said that DDT had been found to cause thinner eggshells and result in reproductive problems and death. She also accused the chemical industry of spreading disinformation and public officials of accepting industry claims uncritically. And if we look at the title, well, it's quite a profound title, really. It refers to the day when the birds will be silent, because they will all have disappeared. And those great flocks that we saw flying and that must have covered the earth will be gone. And what would be the result? Well, a silent spring. And a silent spring would bring with it starvation and destruction, because God has put it into the planet that every single creature, plant, structure should be codependent. One dependent upon the other. That's not co-evolution, that's codependence. Evolutionists speak of co-evolution, I prefer to speak of codependence. Each creature on the planet was to reflect the character of God as it unselfishly served others. If you take the flowering plants and you take the creatures that pollinate them, here you can see the pollen attached to the bee, well, that raises fascinating evolutionary questions. These plants are so highly specialized, some of them, to be only pollinated by their particular organism, and yet they're supposed to have evolved separate from each other, separated by millions and millions and millions of years. How does a plant that needs a particular creature for pollination survive for millions of years waiting for its pollinator to evolve? And how does the pollinator evolve to so precisely fit the role that it has to play? Now, for coevolution, this is an easy word. They obviously are so compatible that they must have developed together, but the paleontological record does not allow that. They must be, in terms of the evolutionary process, separated by these millions and millions of years of time. But what if God is really telling us something else? He's saying to us, look at the bees. And look at how they cooperate and how freely they share whatever they have. You can look at their sting. It's just a transformed ovipositor. And there's another lecture on creation to restoration. We don't want to talk about those issues. But codependence, to me, makes a lot of sense if I look at the character of God. And I look at the structures here. These intricate structures, this long straw. Some of these long straws with enzymes to prevent coagulation, and all of these features brilliantly built into the organisms and into the plants as they codependently rely on each other to perform whatever function they have to perform. And then into all of this, still place the beauty of a master artist. I think God has a lesson for us in all of this. As that little hummingbird inserts its beak into this flower, reaching right down to the reproductive structures of the plant, it does what no other creature could have done for this plant prior to their evolution or appearance. So, little bird, do you have something to tell us about codependence? Can you tell us how you evolved? They tell us that the wings and the feathers are actually, or these feathers are transformed scales. but they develop from the totally different layers than do scales. They're not ectodermal, they're mesodermal. And so the one could not possibly have evolved out of the other, and many scientists will agree that there is no such thing as the evolution of the feather. The feather was always a feather. These creatures play a role, and every single cycle has another cycle. When we look at plants, there's something fascinating about plants. On the surface of the plants, on the leaves, there are structures which are called stomata. Here they are. And these little stomata are controlled by a bunch of cells which are called guard cells. And they are radially orientated with cellulose microfibrils. And when they become turgid, when they get water pumped into them, liquid pumped into them, then they open. And when they go limp, then they close. And these structures open and close in the plants. Now what is fascinating is that these structures respond to certain stimuli. For example, blue light increases guard cell turgor and tends to open the stomata. So as the day approaches and the sky is blue, so these stomata tend to open. But there's something else that lets them open as well. And this is fascinating. There was an article in Nexus, December 1993, Miracle Plants from Sound Waves. Plants, says Steiner, can only be understood when considered in connection with all that is circling, weaving, and living around them. In spring and autumn, when swallows produce vibrations as they flock in a body of air, causing currents with their wing beats, these and songbirds, says Steiner, have a powerful effect on flowering and fruiting of plants. So the sound that we have in the early morning, just before sunrise, of the birds twittering in the branches, tends to open the stomata. And there's something else fascinating about stomata. They absorb not only the morning dew, but the minerals dissolved in the morning dew. Now we spoke about the firmament below and the firmament above. There's really no difference between the atmosphere and the waters of this earth. In the waters there are dissolved minerals. In the atmosphere we have water vapor and there are dissolved minerals. It's just the proportion of water to gases that differs, but the components remain the same. They're both firmament components. So the plant can actually take up the early morning dew, and the Bible says in the morning there was a dew, and then the water rose and dropped and the plants were watered. Something like that happens in Florida to this day. It can be without rain for months and be beautifully green, because with the tidal movement the water level rises and sinks and feeds the plants irrespective of whether there is rain. So it would have been a perfect system. He writes, this is typical fruit I'm getting. They're talking about fruit where they have sound waves which emulate the vibrations and the sounds of birds. I'm getting with this brand new method called sonic bloom. It synchronously combines a spraying of leaves of any plant from tiny sprouts to mature trees with a broadcast of that special sound. So you make the sound and then you spray this fine mist with the minerals and the things in it, and the plants blossom. With that process, simple but scientifically unexplained, I've been able for the first time to get fruit all over the inner branches of my orange trees, greatly adding to the umbrella type. Ooh, that's bad. Umbrella type, which is everywhere the norm. Add to that the fact that the Garvery Center of the Improvement of Human Functioning, a medically pioneering research group in Wichita, Kansas, has tested the juice to show that an increase of 121% in natural vitamin C over normal oranges. And you can understand that this new sonic bloom discovery we're talking about not only improves quantity, but also the quality. So it seems there's a codependence between plants and animals, fruit trees and the fruits of this world and the creatures on our planet. Right, I guess Rachel Carson was right, Holt said nostalgically. The spring season down on the farms is much more silent than ever before. DDT killed off many birds and others never seem to have taken their place. Who knows what magical effect the bird like the wood thrush might have on its enrollment, singing 3 separate notes all at the same time, warbling 2 of them and sustaining the others. So what did God put into this environment? And what must it have been like in the past? Every single thing on the planet is dependent upon something else. Is there a lesson in this for our church? If you come to the fig again, common wisdom has it that every species of fig is pollinated by a particular kind of fig wasp. The fig and the wasp, they say, have evolved to depend upon each other for reproduction. Who came first? Separated by millions of years of time? No, no, no. The 2 of them must have been there together at the same time. Because the dependence is absolute. Without the one, there is no other. So we have the little wasps, every species pollinated by a particular kind of wasp. And if one of the wasps disappears, that variety disappears. And so we have a reduction in variety. Here is a fig, and there is its particular little wasp. If we go into the oceans, and the Bible says, go and look at the fish and let them tell you. If we look at the harmony in a coral reef and how it operates, and the total codependence that we have there, it's mind-boggling. When we see the cooperation between fish and anemones, for example, like this little fish that is totally immune to any one of these nematocysts, the stinging cells of the anemones. And here they cooperate side by side. I was fortunate to be involved in the Namib Desert Ecology program and spent weeks in the Namib Desert, camping in the Kusep Canyon and studying the ecology of these dunes, and to see how nature and animals work together. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling. The little Namib Toktoki, it's bone dry, this desert, but in the morning there's a mist. And this makes me think of the mist in the Bible. This mist comes over the Namib and dissipates during the day. And in the morning this creature puts up its legs like this, and the dew accumulates on the animal, and then he runs it down to his mouth via his legs, and he drinks it. This little creature here, this little scoop lizard, burrows under the sand when it gets too hot. When it's on the surface of the sand, it's standing on 2 legs, and it lifts its other legs alternatively to cool down. The way they actually did the photography was quite mean. You should actually wait there in the desert, quietly, they put him on a surface and they heated it from the bottom to make him do his thing. Because normally if it gets too hot, he just dives under the sand. I remember this creature. We had to do what was called a dune assault to see what kind of creatures there are in that particular dune system. So you take grids and you board them down and you collect every single creature in a cubic meter of the soil. And then you get an idea, taking your grids across the dunes, as to what there is and how they live. And then afterwards, in case you miss something, you do a dune assault and you just work your way through the dune. And I was unfortunate enough to dig up one of these guys. White lady. Fascinating. Here he has his little flap, his web. There's his little hollow under the dunes. And then he covers it up. And you cannot see him at all. And then he waits until some little creature comes by and he grabs it. Or this one, the sidewinder. It has to travel sideways because of the sand, and then it buries itself in the sand, and then it takes this little tail and it sticks out. And then he goes, move, 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 move. And he attracts this little lizard to come and catch that insect. And then this little lizard becomes this one's meal. Well, so even in carnivory, we can see a codependence and an interaction, which is imperfect because God said that originally everything ate plants. But that's another lecture. The whole earth is designed to be in perfect harmony. So if we look at the Earth's energy budget, we can see that there are incoming rays from the sun, a solar energy. It's absorbed by the lands and the oceans, and then it is radiated out. And there's a perfect cycle of balance, or else you would have chaos on the planet. And life as we know it would not be able to exist. So everything seems to work in cycles. There's a water cycle. Water storage in the atmosphere, precipitation, snow melt, runoff on streams, infiltration, groundwater storage, water storage in the oceans, and the cycle of evaporation, condensation, evapotranspiration, surface runoff, all of these, and the cycle is continuous. And the oceans feed the land, and the land feeds the ocean, and the ocean feeds the land, and the land feeds the ocean. And so we continue in cycles. Then we have an oxygen cycle. We have photosynthesis, respiration, phytozooplankton, calcium carbonate deposits, a perfect cycle in oxygen. We have a carbon cycle between the atmosphere, the production of carbon dioxide by living organisms, and again, the reactions which take place in the oceans to keep the carbon cycle in balance. A CO2 cycle is here easier or simply explained. Photosynthesis, organic carbons, root respiration, plant respiration, animal respiration, factory emissions, back again. Nitrogen cycle. This is fascinating. You have atmospheric nitrogen, which is basically inert. And then when you have lightning, that is converted. And you start getting reactions in the soil, and you get your soil nitrates, and you have nitrifying bacteria, and ammonia salts, and dead organisms, and feces, and plants, decaying material, and nitrate taken up by the plant roots, and you have growth. Without this cycle, there would be no life on this planet. And it's kept in perfect harmony, not only by the atmosphere, but all these organisms in the ground as well. Here's a nice simple diagram of this process. Notice that you have in the soil, in the process, you have these nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and then you have denitrifying bacteria. You have free nitrates, you have nitrites, you have ammonia, and every one of these plays a different role. Did all of this evolve to create this perfect harmony? If one of them should not have evolved, life as we know it would not be possible. If we didn't have denitrifying bacteria and nitrogen-fixing bacteria, life as we know it would not exist. Everybody has a part to play. And some of the parts look noble, and some of them are ignoble. But if we didn't have even the lowly bacteria in the ground, we would not have what we have. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. The great work of life is character building. And the knowledge of God is the foundation of all true education. We need to study the character of God, and we can see it in nature. And if we understand the character of God, which is the lesson book, we can incorporate it in our own lives, because our job on this planet is character building. To impart this knowledge and to mold the character in harmony with it should be the object of the teacher's work. The law of God is a reflection of his character. It's totally selfless. Thou shalt not covet. Selfless. Thou shalt not create pain by adultery. Thou shalt not create pain by lying to each other, or killing, or whatever the commandment says. Every single one of them is based on unselfishness. All thy commandments are righteousness, and through thy precepts I get understanding. God has revealed himself to us in his word and in the works of creation. Through the volume of inspiration and the book of nature, we are to obtain a knowledge of God. We need to study more. When we look at the ant and we see how it works, and these ants here, they gather leaves, carry them to their nests, take them down, and then plant fungi on them, which are their food. But fungi form a huge part of the soil structure in any environment. They are, as it were, the kidneys and the livers of this living organism called the soil. And every creature, be it an ant, be it a bacterium, be it a worm, be it a nematode, has a role to play in this function. Proverbs 6 verse 6 says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." I had a headmaster once, and that was his favorite text. And he read it every morning at school assembly. We all knew it off by heart. And I think he had a different connotation when he read it. But it's true. Go and look at the ant. See how it unselfishly works. Unselfishness is the principle of God's creation. Christ's work is to be our example. Constantly he went about doing good. In the temple and the synagogues, in the streets of the city, in the marketplace, the workshop, by the seaside and amongst the hills, he preached the gospel and he healed the sick. His life was one of unselfish service. And it is to be our lesson book. His tender, pitying love rebukes our selfishness and our heartlessness. The lesson of unselfishness, of codependence, the superiority with which we wish to lord it over each other, is not in the order of God. The motive that prompts us to work for the Lord should have in it nothing akin to self-serving. Unselfish devotion and a spirit of sacrifice have always been and always will be the first requisite of acceptable service. Our Lord and Master designs that not one thread of selfishness shall be woven into His work. In our efforts, we are to bring the tact and skill, the exactitude and wisdom that the God of perfection required of the builders of the earthly tabernacle. Yet in all our labors, we are to remember that the greatest talents or the most splendid services are acceptable only when self is laid upon the altar, a living, consuming sacrifice. It is in this sphere that I wish the following lectures to be understood. How we should, in our church, operate. What the function of the various members should be, and what our relationship with each other should be, and how we judge and help each other should be in this context. Of all the people in the world, reformers should be the most unselfish, the most kind, and the most courteous. In their lives should be seen the true goodness of unselfish deeds. Those who claim to be followers of the master worker and who engage in his service as co-laborers with God are to bring into their work the exactitude and skill, the tact and wisdom that the God of perfection required in the building of the earthly tabernacle. And now, as in the time and as in the days of Christ's earthly ministry, devotion to God and a spirit of sacrifice should be regarded as the first requisite of acceptable service. Not one thread of selfishness shall be woven into his work. Not one thread. Do we succeed? It is the motive that gives character to our acts, stamping them with ignominy or with high moral worth. Not the great things which every eye sees and every tongue praises does God account most precious. Nobody sees the nitrification that takes place in the soil, and yet without it we wouldn't exist. The little duties cheerfully done, the little gifts which make no show, and which the human eyes may appear worthless, often stand highest in his sight. The lesson book of nature is fantastic. A heart of faith and love is dearer to God than the most costly gift. The poor widow gave her living to do the little that she did. She deprived herself of food in order to give those 2 mites to the cause she loved. And she did it in faith, believing that her Heavenly Father would not overlook her great deed. It was this unselfish spirit and childlike faith that won the Saviour's commendation. Action derives quality from motive. Every action derives its quality from the motive which prompts it. And if the motives are not high and pure and unselfish, the mind and the character will never become well balanced. God wants heart work, the unselfish purpose, the pure elevated principles, the high and holy motive. He will accept. His grace and power will work with these efforts. All who realize that it is the work of God to prepare a people for His coming will find in their disinterested efforts opportunities where they can do tract and missionary labor. But there may be too much means expended and too much time occupied in making matters so exact and minute that the hard work is neglected and a dry form preserved. We need to do it with a passion. Psalms 139:14, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. If we look at the anatomy of man, every single organ has a function. Every single one of them is important. Some of them may only be important for a while, like the appendix, and some of the glands in the body produce hormones and reactions and antibodies that are only required for a time. Like the appendix produces the recognizing antigens and antibodies to discern what is a good bacterium in the intestine and what is an enemy. And that is fixed. And thereafter we can discern the good from the bad. And every single structure has its role to play. And everyone serves the other. And without the one, the other cannot survive. Genesis 1:29, and God said, Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat, for food. So the original diet was total vegetarian. And then came sin, and thorns and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herbs of the field. So the plants of the field were added to the fruits and the seeds. So the diet of man, choose the best food. In order to know what are the best foods, we must study God's original plan for man's diet. He who created man and who understands his needs appointed Adam his food. Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. That makes logical sense. That's the original diet, and that should be the best diet for us. Why were the other foods like meats added later? Well, because none of this was available on a destroyed planet. But once the plants are there again and the foods are available, there's no reason why we cannot return to the original diet. And today, with the great transport facilities that we have, all that we need is available to us. And if we go and look at the bounty that God has prepared for them that love Him, even in the sin-ravaged world, I would wonder what it would be like on a planet made new. A fraction of the fruits, a fraction of the plants, judging by the paleontological record, is what we have left. And yet we have such a bounty that we can choose from even to this day. I liked this store, so I took a couple of pictures in it. And every single conceivable thing that the heart could desire is here for the taking and for the eating. If we think of all the seed types and the legume types, and every single one of them slightly different, and in combination with the varied diet, each one contributing something unselfishly for the consumer. And so God feeds the birds of the air, and God feeds man, and He's put everything at our disposal. And all of these things grow on this planet. I'm always amused, now that I'm no longer in the evolutionary camp, when I think about how we struggle to make things grow. The vegetables and the plant foods that we need for human diets, how they struggle to grow. How did they survive for millions of years without man to nurture them, having been the last one to evolve? If we cannot even with meticulous care get them to survive under certain circumstances today, the evolution just doesn't make sense. By the sweat of your brow, you shall grow and nurture these plants. Today we talk a lot about organic farming. It's like we've learned something. There's so much disease in the world, and plants just don't seem to provide what is necessary. And so some people have been led to say, well, we cannot survive on a vegetarian diet, there's just not enough in it. But that's not how it was designed from the beginning. And if we'd studied the lesson book of nature, we would have come up with a solution long ago. Long ago. Study the book of nature. Today we have mega farms. People are farming with every kind of fruit or grain or vegetable. And all of these farms are supplied with whatever the plant needs to grow. Did you know that a plant can look perfectly healthy and huge and beautiful with just 5 or 6 elements added to the environment? And so we have the great fertilizing industries of today, which are geared in providing what a plant needs to look good. And they feed them nitrogen and calcium and phosphorus and potassium and sodium and perhaps a bit of magnesium. And then if they look a little bit sickly, perhaps a trace element here and there. And the plant looks perfect. And the world has learned to feed the plants. And disease is becoming more and more and more prevalent. The plants look good, but they don't seem to have the resilience that they should have. And so enter the pesticide industry. Let's spray them and provide them with what they need, or prevent disease from taking hold of them so that they look good until they get onto the plate. And that's how the farming industry operates today. But did God design it like that? If we go back to the original, today we have changed the environments, we feed them, we have hydroponics, such as in this case over here, and we put the minerals in there that we believe the plant needs, and they grow hydroponically, and they grow beautifully. Well, in actual fact, the early world, the early earth, must have been a sort of hydroponic system with the waters coming up, nurturing them, with every single mineral available, and they were healthy, and you had the bird sounds, and you had the plant stomata opening. Well, science has discovered a couple of amazing things about codependence and interaction in the natural world. Today, we plow the ground, we turn it over. Some use deep plows and they turn the earth and then they replant it, put down the fertilizer and the thing that they need. And basically the soil is a sterile medium, almost like a hydroponic, into which you then pour the minerals that you need. Did God design it like that? Well, let's have a look at God's garden. Here is a rainforest. There is no ecosystem like this, no productivity such as this, anywhere in any farming community. And yet, there is no plow that plows these lands, and there is no fertilizer that is added to this panorama. And yet, it produces the fruits and the nuts and the seeds and the plants that feeds the millions of animals that live in this environment. How did God do that? How did He do it? We plow the ground, we rip it clean, we take everything away, and then we sit with a sterile soil and we feed it. If you walk into a natural forest, this is what you see. This is what the ground looks like. Here, there's no plow. There's no turning over of the soil. And here you have the fungi and the decaying material and the leaves and the detritus. But this is a living creature. This is not a dead soil. This is a living soil. And what happens in the soil is a lesson book of codependence on how God wants us to interact with each other and within the church. Organic farming, you do not feed the plant. In a natural rainforest, you do not feed the plant. You feed the soil. You feed the soil. And you place the organic matter, as we saw, the leaves and the detritus on the soil, and all of these little creatures, the nematodes and the worms and the earthworms and the bacteria, all have their function. And there's an entire food web in the soil. You have nematodes and arthropods, some of them at high levels, some of them at low levels. You have bacteria, you have fungi, plant shoots, organic matter. And these bacteria are pivotal to what happens in the soil. You see, soil by itself is inert. A plant cannot absorb anything from a rock. It has to get its minerals in a dissolved state, and that's what fertilizers do. You put the mineral into a medium, you put it on the soil, and it's instantly dissolved in water and is available for the plant. It doesn't happen like that in nature. The rocks contain all the minerals, 84 minerals. Not 5, not 6, 84. In the body, every single enzyme in our body requires the interaction with minerals. And an enzyme will not function properly if its mineral is not there. Some need zinc, some need magnesium, some need this, some need that. And the interactions are intricate. So we need 84 minerals. 84 minerals. Now, how does this happen in the soil? Some of the bacteria that we have in the soil live low down in the soil, and they're called anaerobic bacteria. Others live high up in the soil where the oxygen penetrates, and they're aerobic bacteria. When we plow over a piece of land and we turn the ground round, we put the anaerobic bacteria at the top, and we put the aerobic bacteria at the bottom, and they die. And eventually we have a sterile soil. There is no plow that plows the forest floor except these creatures. The earthworms and the nematodes and all of these, and even some of the larger animals like the moles and the birds with their beaks. They take the organic matter and they take it down into the soil. And they break it up by chewing it and leave the debris and smaller pieces, and different creatures feed on different sizes, just like the animals on the surface feed on different levels. And then the bacteria break down the rest. Now this is fascinating. As the bacteria digest the plant debris, they produce enzymes like we do. But our enzymes, the protein digesting ones, need an acid. So these bacteria produce an acid to digest that debris. And that acid leaches out the minerals out of the rock and the soil. And then those minerals become available to the plant. So if you kill the bacteria, you haven't got any more minerals. If you kill all of these creatures in between by putting pesticides and things into the soil, then the bacteria haven't got a small enough surface area to operate on. And you end up with a sterile soil. You need every single one of these in total codependence. And so in a church, you need all the various individuals in codependence to each other. So in organic farming, you do not feed the plants, you feed the soil. And one of the ways to feed it is through organic compost. Basically what you've done is you've already created the food for all of these creatures to take their portion and eventually to create the minerals through the acids that are produced in the process to do all these things. You can make compost from non-recycled paper, from yard waste, from food waste. We should all have compost in our gardens. In a composting situation, the bacteria function and break down the material, and so you want air to come in because you want a good airflow. So this is a good way to build a box about a yard or a yard and a half by a yard and a half, a meter by a meter approximately, and not to go too big or else you might get spontaneous combustion such as we have here, the steam produced by the heat of this organic heap lying on top of each other. And so you can build these little things. You can put hay, bales in a square and then put your compost inside, and then the next season these hay bales become your next composting. And this is how you feed the soil. And here are some giant vegetables produced by these particular farmers. My wife and I, we grew a Chinese cabbage, which is normally about yay size when you buy it in the shop. And we had one in our garden, grown organically, that she and I had to put our arms around it like this. We fed an entire church of people with one cabbage. So I'm not saying organic farming will produce mega plants. Some of these are nurtured by other means, but you can get very healthy plants. In fact, most organically grown plants will not be mega large. They should be sort of medium-sized. Cooperate with God, with angels, with man, with nature. Cooperate with them. God works unselfishly for us. Through Christ we are connected and stay connected with the universe. Sin separated us and led us to decay. Christ reunites us, and streams of living water sustain us. So if we cooperate with nature, and nature cooperates with us, we have excellent fruits. In an organic garden, where you feed the soil, where you create the substructure, it's fascinating. And those bacteria that come in, those nitrite, ammonia, all of these factions, did you know that every single one of them is essential? Ammonia makes the plant grow quickly, and the leaves get their power and the leaves develop. And that's the first thing the plant uses in the soil, and then the ammonia dissipates, and then the nitrates are available to the plant. They linger longer. The nitrates are important in fruit development, and the ammonia is important in leaf development. So there is a harmony. And the quality of the fruit. With 84 minerals, that plant has an enzyme system which fights off disease. You do not need all the pesticides, you do not need all of those components that are in common gardening. So if we went back to how God designed it originally, we can feed ourselves with magnificent foods, rich in minerals, rich in vitamins, and as you see, if you have the sounds and the birds and the environment out there, magnificent. It must have been a magnificent planet. We need to reconnect with God. He spoke to them words of hope and courage. Let not your hearts be troubled, he said. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am you may be also, and whither I go ye know, and the way ye know. He says he is the way, the truth, and the life. For your sake I came into the world, and for you I have been working. So what must our attitude be? That little nematode in the soil, that little earthworm in the soil, that little nitrogen-fixing bacteria, every single one of them has a work to do. And without that work, the other would not survive. We need to communicate with this God who works in our behalf. Let no person or personal interest separate you from God, who is the source of your strength. When you arise in the morning, gather all members of your household together as did Abraham and invite them to seek God with you. If your business presses strongly and urges you to your work, then there is still greater need to take time to pray, to present your petitions to the throne of grace and secure the protecting care, the aid, the mercy, and the blessing of God. Do not grudge the time that God requires and hurry through a faithless formal prayer that you may rush to your business. A plant doesn't grow in a day. The bacteria do not rush their process because someone's in a hurry. Take a lesson from nature. I wish I could learn that. Only as they were united with Christ could the disciples hope to have the accompanying power of the Holy Spirit and the cooperation of the angels of heaven. With the help of these divine agencies, they would present before the world a united front and would be victorious in the conflict they were compelled to wage unceasingly against the powers of darkness. If we want the cooperation of angels, then we must behave in such a way that they would want to cooperate with us. As they should continue to labor unitedly, heavenly messengers would go before them, opening the way. Over and over we have this word unitedly. Not united in error, united in purpose and in faith. We have to study God's word. We have to study nature. We have to get rid of our selfishness, and then this church will prosper. Hearts would be prepared for the reception of truth, and many would be won to Christ. So long as they remained united, the church would go forth fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners. Nothing could withstand our onward progress. The church would advance from victory to victory, gloriously fulfilling a divine mission of proclaiming the gospel to the world. Our church is in need of codependence, cooperation. It is for our health and happiness to go out of our houses and spend as much of our time as possible in the open air. Do we do that? If we want to have healthy minds, we need to have healthy bodies. If we want to have healthy bodies, we have to obey the laws which God put into nature. Not only the 10 Commandments, the health laws. We have to exercise our bodies. We have to breathe in the good air. We have to eat that which God put at our disposal and which He designed for our bodies. And if possible, eat that which is grown under the best conditions, which reflect the way in which it was in the beginning. The mind of the invalid should be withdrawn from self to the beautiful scenes in nature. We can but be cheerful as we listen to the music of the happy birds, if there is no silent spring, and feast our eyes upon the flourishing fields and the gardens. Isn't it amazing that the world today is waking up to environmental issues, but it doesn't bury its selfishness? It still harps on its selfishness even in environmental issues and tries to use its fellow man in the process. We should invite our minds to be interested in all the glorious things God has provided for us with a liberal hand. And in reflecting upon these rich tokens of His love and care, we may forget infirmities, be cheerful, make melody in our hearts unto the Lord. We need to get rid of our long faces. God's servants are to work together. just as nature works together, blending in kindly, courteous order, in honor preferring one another. The earthworm doesn't say to the nematode, I have no need of you. There is to be no unkind criticism, no pulling to pieces of another's work, and there are to be no separate parties. This is what nature teaches. This is what we should learn to do in the church. Every man to whom the Lord has entrusted a message has his specific work. Each one has an individuality of his own, which is not to sink in that of any other man. You are free agents, yet each is to work in harmony with his brethren. That's the lesson book of nature. In their service, God's workers are to be essentially one. No one is to set himself up as a criterion, speaking disrespectfully of his fellow workers or treating them as inferior. Under God, each is to do his appointed work, respected, loved, encouraged by the other laborers. Together, they are to carry the work forward to completion. We need no image of jealousy in this church. One is not greater than the other. One doesn't have more discernment than the next. 1 Corinthians 1:25, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. And base things of the world and things which are despised has God chosen, and yea, things which are not, to bring to naught things that are. I can still remember my own arrogance when a carpenter came to me to bring me the truth. And he tried to explain to me that evolution was a farce. And who was he? He was a carpenter. I was a professor. How could he tell me that? What foolishness. I was the fool. He was right. In the lives of those who are true to right principles, there will be a continual growth in knowledge. They will have the privilege of being acknowledged as co-laborers with the great master worker in behalf of the human family, and will act a glorious part in carrying out the purposes of God. Let's not put anyone down because he doesn't have the same education, doesn't come from the same background or whatever. This is God's church. He puts these people in the church. So let us show a little bit more respect for each other. Thus, by precept and example, as laborers together with God, they will glorify their Creator. Romans 8 verse 22 says, For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. Let's not add to the pain, and let's wait patiently for God to end the groaning on this planet. And as we look at the lesson book of nature, as we saw how God designed it in the beginning, not for ignoble purposes, but for noble purposes, as we see how every little creature plays its role, how He distributed the animals over the grasses and over the trees, so that one should not outdo the other, so that there would be something for everyone. So we need to incorporate these lessons in the church. As we see how God grows His garden, we should learn how God grows His church. As we see how each little creature in the process there has a vital role to play to make a healthy plant, so each one of us has a role to play to make the others healthy. And if we stop serving self and serve each other, then God will prosper this church like an army with banners. Amen.